Maybe we need to turn a little music on or something. It's so quiet when we stream.
Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Somebody must have a metronome.
I don't, but that's pretty good. You know, when we first started Zooming, I used to play music while everybody joined before we streamed. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
So Auden, I did a quick count. I don't think we have a quorum yet, do we? Turn on my camera.
I can see you, Rich. Your camera's on.
Auden,
I'm counting a quorum.
we have quorum?
We have quorum. I was muted.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Sorry, I joined late. This is
Not
Leon.
late at
from
all. We're
Cupertino.
just about to start, so you're starting right. You're here right on time. Now I can see everybody that we got rid of that. So, hello everyone, and good evening, and welcome to. I think this is our first LAC meeting in I don't even want to know how many months it's been, but glad to see everyone. Happy Veterans Day, and could I please have the roll call?
Yes. Okay. Gibbons.
Here.
Gibbons present. Chow.
Present?
Chow present. Blankley.
Here.
Blankley present. Fliger will be coming in late today. Mock. Mock is absent. Sayok.
Here.
Sayok present. Montano. Montano. And Montano is absent. Turner.
Here.
Turner present. Constantine.
I'm present.
Constantine's present. Ramirez.
Here.
Ramirez present. Dubois. Dubois is absent. Jones.
I'm present too.
Great. Jones is present. Watanabe.
I am here.
Watanabe present. Willia.
Present.
Willia present. And Klein is here for Larson.
Sorry,
I'm not here for Larson. Alyssa Cisneros is supposed to be here, so I just pinged her to attend. So I
Okay.
am not a voting member.
Okay, great. Okay, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much, and welcome everyone. And like I said, today is Veterans Day. I want to thank any veterans that are on the board, anyone who may be listening in. Thank you very much for your service. And with that, we just have one business item to attend to, which is the approval of the committee minutes from the June 10th. That was when we made our last meeting. And again, if you weren't present at that meeting, you can vote on it. You don't have to abstain. You can vote for that if you would like, even if you weren't in attendance. And are there any questions regarding that agenda or that committee minutes from the June meeting? I don't see any hands going up, and I don't see anybody waving at me on their camera. So then I will go ahead and ask for a approval of the minutes. Motion and a second.
So moved.
Second, Watanabe.
Thank you very much. A motion and a second. And could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Turner.
Yes.
Turner, I. Ramirez. Ramirez. I can come back. Perhaps he's absent. Jones.
Aye.
Jones, I. Watanabe.
Yes.
Watanabe, I. Walia.
I'll abstain. I wasn't at the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Abstain. Walia. Sayok.
Yes.
Sayok, I. Blankley.
Yes.
Blankley, I. Gibbons. Gibbons.
Aye. Sorry if you could.
Great. Gibbons, I. Constantine.
Aye.
Constantine, I. Chow.
Aye.
Chow, I. And Ramirez and Dubois are absent. Is
R-
that
Ramirez,
is Ramirez present?
Ramirez is a yes.
Okay, great. And it seems like Mock has joined.
Yes.
Okay, Mock. Okay. So with 10 ayes, the motion carries.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That moves us over to item 2. And I want to introduce our guest this evening, Senator Dave Cortese. Senator Cortese was elected in November of 2020 to represent State Senate District 15, which encompasses much of Santa Clara County in the heart of Silicon Valley. Along with his accomplished career as an attorney and business owner, the senator previously served on the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors for over a decade, with 4 years as board president. On the San Jose City Council for 8 years, including 2 years as vice mayor and as a trustee for the East Side Union High School District for 8 years. That's a lot of years. We won't add them up. So with that, Senator Cortese, thank you so much for attending and speaking with us this evening.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you to all of you, for having me and coming out on this Veterans Day for a little convening this evening. In addition to all that stuff in the introduction, which I appreciate, by the way. I was president of the Cities Association once upon a time. When I was first elected to the San Jose City Council, then Mayor Gonzalez called me in and asked me to serve on the Cities Association. He didn't have any idea what would become of me after that, but I do have mostly fond recollections of of that time. There were always some challenges trying to keep up with what the county was doing back then. Who was going to run a sales tax, who wasn't going to run a sales tax. It seemed like we were always having to weigh in on something very significant. But it really opened my eyes to regional government. I've always been grateful for that. And it was a very coveted thing back then. I don't know if it still is, to to seek the MTC appointment from the Cities Association, and I didn't get it, but I was one of the ABAG representatives for San Jose. And through the process of the Cities Association, not only learned about what was going on in all the cities that aren't San Jose, but what was going on in the region as well. So I think that has stuck with me and continued to inform really how I behave now as a state senator. So thanks to the institution of the Cities Association for that. I know you want me to talk a little bit about the legislative year in review. And I think you know a lot about it. I know the work that you do, and I know the things that you take up, as I just mentioned. So I don't want to get too granular, and I do want to make sure that, you know, I pause and take up questions or comments about things that you really want to talk about, not what I want to talk about. And I'll make sure that happens. But, you know, obviously it was a big year for housing legislation. We'll see how much impact any of that legislation actually has. But, you know, even I was a little bit taken aback when I was up in Oakland a couple months ago to get one of my bills signed by the governor, and he was signing 27 other bills at the same time, all in the housing space. And by that time, the 4 bills that you were probably most concerned about had already been signed, including SB 9 and SB 10. So 27 on top of 4 significant bills ahead of time. The pro tem, Tony Atkins, formed a working group of about 6 senators. And she asked me, it actually existed before I became a senator. Remember, until December 5th of last year, I was a county supervisor. And on December 7th, suddenly I'm a state senator, right? So it was actually a welcome phone call to get for me, having spent so much of my life, both private sector and public sector, you know, in around housing issues or in the housing space, to get a call from the pro tem saying, we'd like you to join this housing work group, given that there's 40 senators and there were a handful of people involved. So that kept me close to what was going on, especially with some of those big bills, including the one that she authored. And she was a primary author on SB 9, and SB 7 was her bill as well. But it also allowed us to, not just me, but people like Senator Hurtado and Senator Caballero and a couple others that were involved with that group, you know, to ask tough questions about local control and get amendments made to the bill so that there was more clarity as to where they were going. What I don't know, the reason I mentioned that as kind of a backdrop, is what, you know, housing production or housing finance or housing bills in general will look like this year. There's no mention yet as to whether or not that housing group in the Senate will continue. I suspect it probably will. There's just been no discussion about that yet. We pick up the process of committees and voting and all that intensity again in January, and that continues to about mid-September. And then we flip the script and we're back here in the district most of the time, October, November, December. Although I was in Sacramento just 2 days ago for a hearing that will essentially inform some of the work I'm doing on one of my bills that has to do with online sex trafficking, separate issue. But housing, climate, despite the fact that you didn't see a lot of bills signed into law this year, the preoccupation with climate, the amount of energy, no pun intended, that was spent by the Senate and members of the State Assembly on climate bills, climate legislation, I mean across the board, not just one thing, was pretty amazing to see, but also pretty discouraging in terms of what actually made it through to the end of the day to get signed into law. Most of what happened around climate that we read about or we heard about or that came to your attention as elected officials really were executive orders by the governor, you know, direction that he stepped in sort of made, and most of that didn't even happen until after the recall election. And then justice reform was the other big area that people spent an awful lot of time in. SB2, of course, my colleague Steve Bradford, Senator Bradford, who at the time he introduced that bill was the lone African American in the Senate, introduced that bill and was just adamant and fought hard to make sure that it didn't get watered down too much, that appropriate compromises were made, but at the same time, that his ultimate intent in terms of making sure there were appropriate checks and balances on the police hiring process and the police disciplinary process, essentially. So that bill was signed into law, as all of you know. But around that, in sort of a satellite way, there were a lot of other justice reform bills, a lot of other justice reform legislation, and it's one of the toughest areas. Housing's tough, climate's tough up there. It may seem like, what are these guys doing in Sacramento? They're just dumping all these housing bills on us, or do they know what they're doing around climate? And are they doing anything around justice reform? The fact of the matter is there's just a tremendous amount of energy and a lot of legislation. Keep in mind, most of you know, the total bill production, the total number of bills introduced in the last session that I just described, January through the middle of September, was about 3,000 bills. And of course, in this job, we're expected to be knowledgeable and to keep up with each and every one of those. Thank God for good staff. On the budget side, which is a whole different and very interesting and fascinating process, really, for somebody like me that came out of local government like you, the budget process is, it's not like what we do. It's not like what we do. I mean, when I say we, I still consider myself, one of you coming from local government, but there's no real transparency around it. You'll get a budget bill or a budget trailer bill, which are really the bills that put the detail into the budget, announced Friday that you're going to be voting on it Monday. We'll vote on a budget bill like that in committee on a Monday or say a Wednesday and bring it into floor session Thursday morning. Barely enough time, to go home and sleep and come back and vote on it again. You kind of wonder, how does the public have any idea, what's going on? The Senate does, and the Assembly does, and the leadership does, and good people like Phil Ting out of San Francisco and Nancy Skinner out of Berkeley, who lead the two major budget committees, they know exactly what's going on. And the rest of us have to do our homework on committees and so forth. But having lived for so long under the Brown Act and being so committed at the local level to transparency, it's a much different, much more of a kind of a racehorse process, if I can put it that way. You're just, the bouncing ball is moving very quickly, but it also is a way to get a lot of things done. And through that process, the governor will sometimes essentially usurp legislation that people propose and just essentially put that legislation right into a trailer bill or the budget bill and essentially do that thing. For example, I wanted to model statewide the guaranteed income for foster youth program that we created in Santa Clara County under SB 739, my bill, in the governor's office, about halfway through the session, hired former Mayor Tubbs as a direct advisor to the governor. So we knew at that point the governor was very interested in guaranteed income, and we were kind of, declaring or celebrating anticipated victory. But what they really wanted to do is basically just build our bill right into the budget, which they did. And now there's a $35 million grant program for cities and counties that want to work in that space. And what they did is add to foster youth pregnant women. So given that a lot of cities would be more inclined to set up grant programs or guaranteed income programs for that population of pregnant women, rather than foster, which is really a county thing. That's kind of how that ended up, how that sausage got made, if you will. But it ended up in the budget, and it's a real thing. That's kind of, as I said, kind of amazing how something like that just gets planted right in the budget and becomes a new program for the entire state of California. There was a lot of work around mental health augmentation, which I could go into later if people are interested in that, in very much the same fashion. Matching dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars installed in the budget, really, which was percolating up from the legislature, which had been introducing bills to try to do that, to try to get mental health, fiscal help, to cities and counties to be able
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by.
So someone wants me to stop soon. And then of course education, and I think you all know with the 75, what ended up surprisingly being a $75 billion surplus instead of a $58 billion deficit. The Prop 98 4 went up significantly. I think it was, I want to say 38 billion just for Prop 98, but that might actually be a little bit low. That said, because it's a floor, because it's a new floor, that Prop 98 guarantee has to be met every year now. And it's something for all of you to be paying a lot of attention to, because just because we did great last year, and just because there'll be somewhat of a nice ending balance probably this year, in other words, another surplus, quote unquote, that surplus has to essentially reach back and bring forward the new Prop 98 guarantee that we established last year, right? The new floor. And so it may look like we have money that's already pre-committed to the public education system. And of course, that always seems to mean less for cities and counties, right? When that happens. So it's a problem for the legislature as well. It's not something to just for us to throw up our hands and say, oh, well, sorry, cities, sorry, counties, that a ton of money is going to education year over year now. Great for the schools, great for the teachers who pick up maybe 5 or 6% on their salary schedule. But it isn't cavalier there. The Senate and the Assembly, the folks I work with primarily do not take this lightly and are very concerned. People like John Laird, who chairs the Budget Subcommittee on Education, he's not glorifying that. He's saying, look out. I mean, this is going to be something that is a zero-sum game, and we got to deal with it. So good news, bad news in that respect. Fire, I think, was the other, huge investment item this year, and I think you'll see more of that in the future. And obviously, Project Roomkey, Project Homekey really got the kind of attention that I think the governor wanted to give it back in 2019 before the pandemic hit. He had already sort of had his toe in the water, right? He said, we're going to put $1 billion, into homelessness, and there'll be a lot more in the future. And then the pandemic and SIP and everything happened, and they said, forget that. We're going to have a $58 billion deficit. And that wasn't the governor mispredicting or any one person. What I learned when I got there was everybody had that calculation of a $58 billion deficit, because the projection was that income taxes was going to go down, and probably property taxes too, much like the meltdown of a dozen years ago. And for a variety of reasons, including just hard work, and I think local officials, being really, really good about responding to the pandemic and trying to keep, people productive in their own communities, and fighting for businesses to stay open or get reopened. I mean, there's just a number of reasons for it, but we should be proud of the fact that as a state, we've kind of flipped the script and kept the income tax not only flat, but up a little bit. And so, as you know from your own budgeting work, when you budget for a huge deficit and all of a sudden you end up flat or a little bit to the plus side, what that really means is that deficit, you get to add back into your budget, right? You get to call that revenue again. So But you know, we've already heard that same trend is going to continue going forward. Just not as grand, not as much to work with. But I think we're all probably pretty happy that the kind of recession that we thought might be in place by now, back in 2019, didn't occur. And whether it was a pandemic or it was just time for a downturn, I think we were all expecting by now we were going to be hurting a little bit more than we actually are. So I'll stop there. I don't know what's going to happen with infrastructure yet. I have a caucus tomorrow with our Democratic caucus. I'll probably hear a lot about that in terms of how that translates into state action, the federal infrastructure package. But I'm afraid I know no more about that than you do at this point. Again, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to try to answer questions. So.
Well, thank you, Senator. And before we take questions, I'm going to open it up for public comment to see if there's anybody who wishes to address us from the public. I don't see any hands going up, and I don't see anybody on their phone. Oh, there is one hand going up. Roland LeBron, you have 3 minutes. I know you're not used to that much time, so I don't know if you're going to be able to fill it.
No, I'm probably not going to use more than 30 seconds. Good evening, Senator. So my question is very simple, is whether you as a senator intend to support Assembly Bill 1091 when it reaches the Senate, and if not, why not? Thank you.
Yeah, I probably have to go to my iPhone and look up AB 1091. It's a
Berman bill. It's a Berman bill that deals with the VTA as it is now.
Oh, I have not Oh, it's a Berman bill that leaves it the way it is now. I thought the Berman bill. I thought the Berman bill was trying to change the governance at the VTA, and I wasn't supportive.
That is correct.
Yeah, I was not supportive of his approach on that. I'm certainly open to.
So my next question is why not?
I didn't think that his governance structure solved any of the real problems that we're trying to address, Roland. I could be wrong about that, but it's just my own analysis. Nobody's lobbying me on it. I haven't really even heard from all of you on it. I'd like to hear, when I say all of you, I mean all these good folks at the Cities Association. So certainly like to hear more from people, but I was pretty standoffish on the bill, as it started to move through the session during the first part of the 2-year session. So that's all I can tell you at this point. Just my own analysis. As you know, Sunshine is my chief of staff, who was with Jim Bell for a number of years, and we're pretty conversant, having served at MDC and VTA, and we just weren't excited about the proposed new composition. So, but we'll see. The bills possibly could be amended. Who knows what's going to happen next? But anyway, I don't want to dominate the conversation here with that. I know time's limited.
Great, thank you, Senator. And I don't see any other members of the public with their hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and close public comment and move to my colleagues to see if they have any questions. So please go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll call on you. I don't see any hands going up. And I don't see anybody raising their virtual hands. So we do have one hand. Laurel, you're up.
Thank you. I wanted to welcome the senator to this group. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You mentioned something about mental health, and I know Los Gatos has been working hard to find resources and make sure we get adequate resources for mental health for issues that are happening in our community. Could you say a few more words about the mental health piece that you're seeing moving forward in Sacramento? Thank you.
Well, on the education side, Laurel, which may be helpful in Los Gatos, some of that is, I've always been amazed at, even when I was a county supervisor, at sometimes how little information there is about resources available for, mental health intervention in the schools. And, the county has a schooling services program, which any of the districts or individual schools can sign up for, which will put a coordinator right on the campus of the school that has full access to, to the county safety net caseload, right? Full would be basically like, it's just someone, it's like having a social worker or a clinician who has a PIN number, so that when a kid is exhibiting some issues, they can literally be moved from the classroom for a few minutes into a coordinator that intervenes, that has access to any county records on that youth, plus the school records through the County Office of Education, can make a decision whether to call the family in after school, probably get that kid right back into the classroom so they're not missing time. There's no transfer of the child to a mental health facility or to, unless there's a serious episode going on, or discipline or anything like that. It's worked really, really well in the districts that have it. I know down in Morgan Hill, they are, in the Gilroy area, South County area, even there's some school districts down there that love it. Campbell is the same way. If you're not Palo Alto, and I'm not sure about Los Gatos, but some of the districts haven't really done that. But back to the legislation, we've increased the amount of money pretty dramatically, and the amount of matching money that's available for those programs at the state level. And my staff can get you more information on that. Andrea in the Capitol office, or any one of us can work with you more closely if you're trying to sort of assist the schools in the city, in the town, of course. Where you have the captive audience, the youth are there already, right? That's the beauty of it. The same youth in your town are actually in the school during the day, and they're a captive audience, and that's why it's most effective to try to reach them there. But as far as getting the resources funneled them and maybe getting their attention to get them committed or get them involved, that would be very helpful, I think, to everyone. And that'll continue, that effort will continue. On the adult side, we just have a long, long way to go. The county itself is grappling right now with the decision whether to build another jail or mental health facility, which is a huge multi-million-dollar investment. A lot of the future will pivot off of that decision, right? What happens? The state has come to realize, I think, up and down the state in all 58 counties, that we have a mental health crisis. It's not just because of the pandemic. The pandemic, it's one of those things where the pandemic has unveiled, essentially, and made people much more aware of what is really going on out there, and how vulnerable and fragile so much of the population is. There's no beds for short-term or long-term mental health care in the state, in this county. There's very few. In the West Valley, El Camino has a handful of beds. Stanford has, I think, less than a dozen. And usually those aren't available because there's a whole hell of a lot more than a dozen people in line trying to get those. The county, ironically, has very little in terms of that kind of help. And so when we talk about things like laws that will get people off the street, and the fundamental question on the other end of it is, and then put them where? Even on a 5150, that's why so many straight up mental health cases are ending up in jail, because the judges don't want to send them back out on the street if a social worker or the police are calling for a 5150. So they say, well, send them down to main jail or send them to Elmwood, which is not a good environment for somebody who's already experiencing the traumatization of psychosis or something like that, as we all know. So we have a long way to go, but it is just such a huge priority in the state legislature right now that I think, as a sort of a foreshadowing, I think you will see a lot more, both on the budget side and the legislative side this session, this coming calendar year. But we're happy to work with you on the youth stuff where we already have some resources.
Thank you for that question, Laurent. And getting back to some of the things you were mentioning, Dave, regarding mental health. I think in my past life, I saw our call volume go up in San Jose when Agnew's closed, and we saw a lot of people who had to be under medical care. In other words, making sure that someone gave them their medication, and if they're just let out on the street, they may not be so diligent in taking that. So yeah, I think we have to come back to the model where maybe we have some kind of a facility like when we had Agnew's that will help augment that, because as you said, putting them in jail is not or is not the right place for them, and taking up hospital beds is not the place for them either, because of the fact that we already have a dearth of hospital beds, as we've seen with the COVID crisis, that we just don't have enough hospital beds in the county. So something needs to go.
You're right, Rich. I can only imagine as a public safety officer how many hours and hours you spent explaining to families at their front door, calling, on a wellness check, showing up with PD or whatever, this is trying to help them navigate. There's very little navigation for people. There's very few good answers when you do start trying to navigate for folks. People don't understand what to do. A lot of mental health issues, especially around 18, 19, 20 years old, are very rapid onset, very sudden onset. Families, are taken aback because everything's fine, and then all of a sudden, their child, a young adult in the household, is having a psychotic episode, and so the presumption is there must be resources for this, just like there is for heart attack and stroke and broken legs and everything else. So let's get the EMTs out here to help out, right? Well, it's not. It's really it's the system we have not only here but across the country, as I understand it, is built on a criminal platform, not a mental health platform. It's not the criminal justice system's fault that happened. That's just what happened. It's probably been that way since the Romans were in power. I don't know. But we've got to get the whole mental health system on a medical platform where people basically know when they call 911 because somebody's acting out all of a sudden in a way they've never seen before, on the street, in front of their shop, in their home, that the first tier of response is crisis intervention. It's medical intervention. And until and if that person starts to exhibit some true dangerous proclivities, it should stay on a medical platform. But again, you've got to have the medical resources. You just outlined that. If you don't have any place to take them, they end up in so many of these calls that end up in tragedy later because they end up in some sort of violence or police intervention. When you look back on it, including mass shootings, there were 8, 9, 10 calls, house calls, before, and essentially nobody really had any place to place that individual for help, and they stayed in the home. And they continued to be in an untenable situation. So we've just got a lot of work to do. It's profound work. It's great work, but it's going to, that whole thing about turning the ship. I mean, this is almost a 180-degree turn that has to be made. Thank you for asking the question. Also, thank you, Laurel Pavetti, for on a previous Zoom I had with West Valley mayors to talk about bolstering the language in the Brown Act. I may have said that, not you, but you asked, how can we get some state help in terms of the meeting disturbance issue. And we've all been through that. Obviously, Marico and the town of Los Gatos have been through it to an extreme recently. But we all have the attorneys. I'm trained as a lawyer, but I mean, right? They go back to the Brown Act and say, well, technically, there's sort of a subjective point here where you say these individuals are so disturbing the meeting that it now supersedes their First Amendment rights or their rights to petition, the right to be in the town hall, right? But it's an unsettling place to be because making that call could end up in a lawsuit, a civil rights issue, or something like that. So I want you to know that after that call we had, I talked to Evan Lowe, and we are going to introduce legislation to bring more definition to the Brown Act around the area of what does constitute a disturbance and what should clearly, as much as we can create a bright line for all of you who are chairing these meetings, to make that decision that someone's so disruptive that you have the right to eject them and remove them and have law enforcement do that for you and move on with your meeting and not have to be in, ambiguity about that. So we'll work on that. We're going to need, I think at some point as we get that language together and we get closer to January, it would be good to reconvene with this group and talk about real life, talk about what that bill should be before, it gets too far. And we don't want to be accused of leaving something out or not doing it right. I think you can probably craft that bill better than we could, but we're happy to be the authors of it. And I suspect it would have a good chance of getting to the governor's desk if we can do it right. And hopefully that'll help. The current situation you're grappling with is one thing, and my heart goes out to you struggling with that, and of course my advocacy goes out as well. But this is another one of those red flags that says we gotta fix the law and make it so that it's much more clear to people as to what the consequences are of their actions when they purposely come in and try to turn one of our city halls or town halls into the U.S. Capitol January 6th. I mean, that's basically, frankly, let me just say parenthetically, I'm not sure the state capitol has figured that out that well yet, but we can certainly try to help all of you figure it out. Sorry to go off on a tangent, but I wanted to.
No, not at all. I'm looking now. I don't see any other hands up. I will ask Senator if you could talk a little bit about your bill that you had put forward earlier this year, the SB 649, the affordable housing. Could you, and in the local tenant preference, could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, good bill that you can opt into. Basically, you can, like, you're all familiar with TEFRA hearings. I think they used to be prolific. When I first started working at City Hall, and Laurel Pravetti could attest to that. I mean, we were doing TEFRA hearings, it seemed like every Tuesday night, every time we had a land use meeting, because in those days, you use this TEFRA hearing to qualify affordable housing for tax exempt bonds or tax credits that they wouldn't otherwise be allowed unless the local government made this TEFRA declaration that this project should qualify, for these federal, tax programs. And one of the things that has been experimented with a little bit in San Francisco and maybe Los Angeles, I'm not sure, but for sure San Francisco, which goes back to this bill that you're talking about that I introduced, is to say that if you make a declaration that a project is going to offset displacement that would otherwise occur. In San Jose, think about the debate around Google or something like that, but it could happen in any community. You can go in and qualify that project by making that finding at your city hall or town hall under a TEFRA hearing, basically, that this project should qualify for federal tax benefits because it is going to create affordability for people that are displaced or would otherwise be displaced from our community. So how that, it's like, I know some of your communities are smaller, some of them are larger, all the way to San Jose, of course, being the largest. But in the smaller communities, you may have less opportunity to do that, just because that's typically I think a multifamily tool, and you may not be doing that much multifamily in a smaller jurisdiction. But we have a lot of mid-sized jurisdictions in this county too, what I would call Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Gilroy, Morgan Hill, as it's been growing. I mean, these are opportunities for you to go in and say, let's provide this developer tax credits essentially in exchange for affordability, but not because of, they're doing senior affordable housing or some specific demographic, but we're just defining the demographic that they're helping as displaced persons. So you get to make that finding. It's local control, right? We're just saying in the bill, if you make that finding, then you should be able to qualify that developer for that tax credit. So it's if you don't, well, that's why I called it an opt-in. If you look at these projects and say, nah, that's not really what's happening here, it's totally up to you.
Right.
So it's a tool. It's another tool, and we think it could be useful. And again, probably in the big cities where they're doing more housing production, you'll see it more often.
Well, I can tell you, just for our city as an example, the housing bills have made it a little bit more difficult for us to produce affordable housing, because with our growth control measure, we actually made the developers, if they were outside of the downtown area, that 15% of their project had to be affordable.
Yeah, good.
So we don't have that control, but we don't have that ability any longer.
Well, in your most of the bills that we've had discussions about over the past few weeks, essentially exempt local control measures like that. In other words, so you're the one word, what I'm talking about, the bill you just asked about, would really just create the possibility you can do that. Now, I think the reason I say it, there's a lot of local control there, is the bad news is the displaced population is sort of a little bit of a subjective call, right? It's a little bit, an applicant isn't going to be able to come in all too often and just say, I can absolutely factually prove this in such a way that I'm entitled, to a good outcome from this TEFRA hearing. I think the finding is going to have to be made by the city or county that in your estimation, the project offsets displacement issues that you have in your community. And that's the way it's set up. Again, love to have, that one's coming back. We had a 12 bill limit imposed upon us halfway through the session. Otherwise, that bill would have kept moving. And it might have already been to the governor's desk had we been able to continue to get committee support and support from the other house. Mm-hmm. But because we paused it, just because of the numerical traffic this year and the cap to 12 bills, we sort of painfully just put that in a parking lot to January. But the good news about that is it gives us time to get more input from all of you. We certainly want to make sure that's not imposing any conflict for you, in terms of policies that you already have locally. It's meant to be a tool, for you to work through affordability issues to qualify people for federal tax relief, basically, in their projects, if you feel they're doing what needs to be done in terms of displacement. So happy to work with you some more on that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for the explanation. And we just have time for one more question. And Liz Gibbons.
Thank you. Hello, Senator Cortese, once again. And I wanted to take note of that because it's very much noticed and appreciated how available you've made yourself to your constituent group. And that's very much appreciated. So thank you for being so available. Second, thank you for responding to my question from the West Valley mayors and managers on SB 10 units. Thank you for that from your staff. I wanted to ask you on your radar for the next year, take a look at AB 787, which, if I understand it, because I just got a presentation yesterday on it, has to do with, let me think here. I just wrote it down and now I can't find it. It's a new type of financing for affordable housing. Mm-hmm. It's CSCDA. And what it does is allows people to come in and buy existing assets and convert them into various levels of affordable housing, but it doesn't count for RENA numbers. So what's the advantage to a state to do this if you get no value and you give up property tax? You get no property tax for these projects. So there's got to be a really strong value. So if you'd be kind enough to put that
Yep.
on. our
So
radar.
787.
Yes, AB 787 was the number I was given. And finally, there were at least 31 housing laws signed by the city, by the governor this year.
Yes, there were 31.
All effective January 1st. The burden on cities to implement the requirements of 31 laws while they're doing housing elements is really extraordinary. So I did write a letter and read it at ABAG's last meeting, asking if the governor would allow cities without penalty to be late on their housing elements. Because the ability to figure out SB 9, SB 10, and all these is extraordinary. After COVID, losing staff, and everything else you want to think about impacting cities and redistricting. So
Yeah.
our plates are very, very full.
I can only imagine, and we were having the West Valley meeting the other day, even though I was giving the advice to get in there and, take another look at your objective zoning standards, especially around SB 9. I think I mentioned it then, but it's not lost to me. I've been thinking about it ever since we had that conversation, how much work that is. It's a tremendous amount of work. And ordinarily you'd have public process throughout all that work too. It's not as if you can just, produce a document, in a month through your brightest minds, your planning, your best planning minds, building and planning minds. You have to, people are want to be really engaged in this. It's about their neighborhood. So I think your point is well taken. I think another argument, and I hadn't thought about this that much, Liz, but we really need, and you work at the regional level, and some of the others of you have. If we're not getting accurate housing element information from you, if we're not getting accurate general plan information, accurate extrapolated information at the regional level, then the entire SCS is a house of cards, right? I mean, Plan Bay Area means nothing, and Plan Bay Area is about a whole bunch of things, but mostly GHG reduction. So do we really want that to be off? And then we've been in those regional meetings together where the staff up there is going crazy because they're saying we can't model this stuff accurately. We're having a hard time. Again, I know Laurel, I don't mean to keep singling you out, but I know you've literally worked firsthand in that process, that HCD process. So, let's talk about that some more soon. Maybe I can get Sunshine Borelli and Ryan Mickle from my staff, who really focus on the housing stuff, to work with you a little more aggressively than I could in terms of figuring out exactly what the ask is, what the timeline would be, initial timeline, and see if it's something that maybe even the governor would consider doing by executive order, just creating a pause. And I think what everyone would want to know, of course, is this a good faith pause, or is it, a delay tactic, right? I mean, that's always the rub. But I think the way you're presenting it, and based on my own understanding of local government, especially right now with the pandemic, I don't think the county of Santa Clara, no offense to the county, but I mean, that planning department seems to be so had been so crippled by the pandemic. I mean, I don't even know how they would begin to do countywide unincorporated area, objective zoning standard review, in the period of time between now and January. It's just unrealistic. So, let alone some of the other things. Also would love to hear, so we'll follow up on that. Also would love to hear from you in the future about some things that don't rise to the marquee level, like some of the major housing bills. But there were parking bills, there were bike and pedestrian bills. There were a lot of bills that had to do with really kind of the local control of municipal government usually asserts based on their understanding of how traffic moves in their communities, where parking is needed, where it's not needed. And some of those bills stalled, which was a good thing, in my opinion. But, even out, like, you can't, it's again, one size fits all the way some of the legislation's coming through. So I'd love to hear from you and be able to go back to my colleagues, including Senate leadership, as needed, and say, this isn't, again, no offense to San Jose, we hear loudly, Chappie from San Jose, and a lot of good stuff comes out of San Jose, and a lot of good legislative ideas. But what I think a lot of these bills work better in a big city environment like San Francisco than they do, perhaps in Campbell or the town of Los Gatos or whatever. And frankly, I was out at a community meeting near Elm Rock and King with a bunch of neighborhood associations out there 2 months ago. They are so impacted by lack of parking because families are multiple to a household. Elm Rock Avenue, as many of you who've been involved in VTA know, has been reduced because in terms of parking and such because of the VTA route and the rapid transit route. So, of course, people in the neighborhood associations are oblivious to the fact that there's a bill out there that says if you live within essentially a quarter of a mile from a transit stop, any developer can come in without parking minimums. And people are just throwing up their hands saying, well, of course, I'm on Elm Rock Avenue in an impacted neighborhood at King and Elm Rock. Obviously, there's a major transit stop, rapid transit stop right across the street. We're glad that it's there, but don't take our parking away now. So that's my take, because I think that's what I hear from the neighborhoods. That's what I hear from some of you. But it would be great during the course of the session to hear from you. And I think it's not about you giving me cover, but oftentimes what we'll hear in our own caucus is people will say, what are you hearing from your cities? What are you hearing from your counties? And silence is not a good thing. If it could be my fault, but if I haven't done this, I really can't in good faith say anything. So we want to hear from you with some specificity. And I'm on the housing committee, I'm on the transportation committee, I'm on the budget committee and the budget subcommittee. So I'm in a very good place, to bring your concerns forward, on those kind of municipal issues.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Senator. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to helping you and supporting you on your bill, SB 649.
Okay, great. And we'll get back to you on all these issues. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for your time and thank you for your great work.
All right. Good night.
Good night. All right, everyone. We are at 6:56. Is there any discussion on any of the bills? I know that we did want to talk about SB 9. And Andy, do you want to briefly talk about that? You're muted, Andy.
Paul Penninger is going to join us for a moment. He's our consultant with Baird and Driscoll, and he just is going to talk about SB 9 a little bit. And Paul, you can go ahead and we're going to see if you can speed. I think everybody would want to hear about SB 9. Maybe I should get a little verification from everyone that everyone wants to talk SB 9.
Got a thumbs up.
Okay,
and Andy,
right? Am I getting yes?
You were going yes. We'll go ahead and do it. You're going out a little bit. You may want to turn your camera off just because you sound like you were in a popcorn machine there for a second.
Okay, that would be more fun than where I
am. All right, Paul, you're up.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do an abbreviated version of this presentation, which I had originally planned to be about 15 minutes, and I'm going to make about 2 minutes. But the slides and all of the materials will be available. So as everybody knows, SB 9 was passed by the legislature and signed into law by the governor, and it provides ministerial approval of 2-unit housing developments in single-family residential zones and also for urban lot splits within single-family residential zones. And there have been a lot of questions about how this law will be implemented at the local level. And in our role as Baird and Driscoll as the facilitators, technical assistance providers for the Santa Clara County Planning Collaborative, we've been working with local jurisdictions to provide technical assistance and materials and an interpretation of this law so that it can be implemented at the local level. I won't go into great detail here. I wanted to show this infographic, which is still under development and is currently being reviewed by ABAG's general counsel to make sure that this interpretation of the law, which has been vetted already by the law firm of Goldfarb and Lippman, as well as other experts, is really consistent with the way that ABAG's attorneys see the implementation of the law. But you can see that through the addition of additional units on existing sites, as well as urban lot splits, that there could be the potential on certain existing lots for up to 4 total units, or the addition of 3 total units when you combine new units created through duplexes or through urban lot splits with ADU or junior ADU units. So this infographic will be finalized soon, and it and a lot of other materials will be available to you and your staff and the community so that you can see how SB 9 might get applied on the ground. See if I can go to the next slide. Okay. So the Turner Center, another thing I wanted to just mention, since we do have such limited time, is that the Turner Center at UC Berkeley already did a study before SB 9 was passed on the potential impacts of this law on communities across California. And they looked at every jurisdiction in California that had more than 5,000 lots. And according to their modeling, which looked at the economic feasibility of creating a duplex unit or doing an urban lot split, the impacts in most California communities are likely to be modest and gradual. So it will potentially unlock incrementally more units and parcels that are already financially feasible under existing law. Although typically, and in many places, most existing lots and single family homes are not expected to take advantage of SB 9. So this is how this looks in Santa Clara County. The Turner Center provided data, as I said, for all jurisdictions with greater than 5,000 single family parcels. So this excludes Los Altos Hills and Monte Sereno in Santa Clara County. But you can see overall by city that there is an estimate of the total single family parcels that would be eligible parcels, where SB 9 would be likely to increase the number of market feasible units, and then what the total feasible units would likely to be created out of SB 9 in each jurisdiction. So this ranges anywhere from 700 units in Campbell all the way up to 15,900 units in San Jose, for a total of 36,900 in the county overall. Now this is just one analyst, although a very good respected analyst view of what SB 9's impact will likely be, but as you can see, it's likely to be relatively modest and gradual over time. This is a little bit hard to see. I apologize for that. But this is also, I didn't realize it was going to be so fuzzy until I saw it on my screen here. A few things for you all to know going forward. These are key action items for jurisdictions to implement SB 9, and also a few things that are still kind of unknowns that have to be worked out. So some of the key action items and we're helping local jurisdictions work on are creating objective zoning or design standards related to SB 9 that can be applied, creating application forms and checklists, creating recording of deed instructions for short-term rentals and future lot splits, and also an owner occupancy affidavit. So one kind of little known part of SB 9 is that it requires owners who are taking advantage of the urban lot split to sign an affidavit saying that they're going to live in the unit for at least 3 years. So there's a lot of forms and sort of other processes that need to be implemented, developed and implemented at the level of local jurisdictions that still need to be worked out, and that ABAG and HCD and each of the county collaboratives, including the Santa Clara County Planning Collaborative, are working on with local jurisdictions. So what are we doing? We're working on technical assistance and training. As I said, we're connecting jurisdictions with regional and also state resources, including resources that are being contracted by ABAG to provide legal advice and counsel from firms like Goldfarb and Lippman, And then we're also developing a scope of work and template report for SB9 related objective design standards, both at the regional level and at the local level. So to that end, the Santa Clara County Association of Planning Officials is convening a meeting on Tuesday of next week to talk about what would be really helpful for staff in each city to have in the way of guidance on objective design standards to apply SB9 over the next couple of months. So that was my speed presentation of SB9. There's a lot of other details. If folks have questions, I can stay on and answer those.
Thank you, Paul. That was 6 minutes. We appreciate that. We are 4 minutes over time. So I do see one hand up. I'll just ask for a very succinct question, and then I will turn this over to Enrico. So with that, Liang, you have a quick question?
Oh, yeah. So for SB9, escaped me. Sorry. Oh, okay. So sorry. So for the housing element, how could we project the units that might come from SB9 in our housing element?
We don't know yet. That's one of the.
Would ABAG decide that?
ABAG will not decide that. That's up to HCD. So ABAG and also every single housing element consultant and person working in housing policy has asked HCD for guidance on this. And we are awaiting guidance from HCD because it's HCD that actually evaluates and certifies the local sites inventories that are prepared by local jurisdictions. So we have asked for guidance from HCD. The expectation is that a certain number of units will be able to be counted towards RENA for each jurisdiction in the housing element, but this is as yet unknown. We have some precedents for looking at this because of the statewide survey that we've done on ADU affordability. And so that's also under review by HCD. So this is a very active question, very active and important issue. So thank you for the question. And it's something that the regional agency and staff are working really hard on to get clarification.
Right. So do you expect HCD to issue some guidance next year, early next year, likely?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
So when your consultant and your staff tell you that they don't know, they really don't know.
Thank you, Paul. All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really appreciate that. Before I turn it over, we do have a member of the public that wishes to address us, and I will go ahead and open public comment. Mr. LeBron. And it looks like you have 2 minutes now.
And less than that, because I didn't get the unmute, but Mr. Chair, through the chair, I have a very quick question. Is whether the cities association would support a ballot measure to repeal this legislation, and if not, why not? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that's a loaded question. I think there's a lot of people that would vote to appeal that. So some of these rules that are coming down on us. So that's an open-ended question. But thank you very much for the question, because I'll tell you, for us, Morgan Hill, yes, we would like to repeal some of these. But anyway, moving on.
I have just a quick note that this will be uploaded to the website. It will be listed under presentations. We'll also link it to the meeting today.
Great. Thank you, Andy, for that. All right. I apologize, Enrico. I am 7 minutes over.
No worries. Let's just roll right into it. And so welcome, everyone. We're now rolling into Cities Association Board of Directors meeting. And I know that there's some movement. So if I could ask Auden to do a roll call. And Auden, you're on mute. So.
Yes, sorry. Just taking a second to open up the file for roll call.
Take your time.
All right, I'm ready. So Bybee.
Present.
Bybee present. Chow.
Present.
Chow present. Blankley.
Here.
Blankley present. Flagger.
Here.
Flagger present. Mock.
Present.
Mock present. Sayak.
Here.
Sayak present. Montano. Montano is absent. Turner.
Here.
Turner is present. Constantine.
Present.
Constantine present. Abakoga.
Here.
Abakoga present. Dubois is absent. Jones.
Present.
Jones present. Watanabe.
Here.
Watanabe is present. Willia.
Present.
Willia present. And Klein.
Present.
Klein is present with 13 present. We have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Auden, and happy Veterans Day to everyone. We have 3 items on our consent agenda. Would anyone like to pull anything off of consent? I see no hands raised. Would Roland like to speak to anything on consent? No hand raised, and so I look to the board to see if I can have a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second, Abakoga.
Okay. And so Auden, if you wouldn't mind calling the question.
Yes. Mock.
Yes.
Mock, aye. Constantine. Constantine. I can come back to him. Willia.
Abstain on 1A and 1C. I am not familiar with the background, and yes on 1B.
Okay. I believe we are making a motion on the whole consent agenda. Is that okay? Can I seek advice from Gary?
Yeah, we'd have to split the question first. It might be simpler to, if it's acceptable to the council member, Willia, to simply abstain on the whole matter. Otherwise, we'd have to split the question. That would actually require a vote to split it.
That works. Thank you, Gary.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Abstain.
All right. Willia abstain. Chow.
Aye.
Chow, aye. Flagger.
Yes.
Flagger, aye. Constantine.
Aye.
Constantine, aye. Watanabe.
Yes.
Watanabe, aye. Bybee.
Aye.
Bybee, aye. Sayak.
Yes.
Sayak, aye. Abakoga.
Aye.
Abakoga, aye. Blankley.
Yes.
Blankley, aye. Turner.
Yes.
Turner, aye. Jones.
Aye.
Jones, aye. And Klein.
Aye.
Klein, aye. And did Montano or Dubois join? I believe not. With 12 ayes and 1 abstention, we have the motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And so for those that were a part of the Legislative Action Committee, we had a great conversation with Senator Cortese about the merits of the regional work that we do and how that rolls up into Plan Bay Area 2050. So I think it's a great continuation into our next agenda item. Andy, would you like to provide any previews before we introduce our guest today?
No, actually, Liz and I can Liz and Nisa may want to give a preview. I would defer to our members on the ABAG Executive Board.
Okay, and so I start with Nisa.
Happy to, and it'll be a quick introduction. Dave Vaughton is the lead ABAG expert on Plan Bay Area 2050. He led us through the entire process the last few years, and so I'm very happy Andy was able to get him for the meeting today, and I think he's going to give us an update on Plan Bay Area 2050 and then what the implementation plan looks like and what it means for our cities. So with that, Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
And Dave, welcome. Before I hand the microphone to you, I wanted to see if Councilmember Gibbons would like to provide any comments as well. Both of them represent Cities Association, and so it's hard work, and we appreciate the work that they're putting into it. Councilmember Gibbons.
Thank you. No, I think Dave can speak very well for himself, and Nisa gave the right introduction for all of his hard work. amazingly survived it all.
Thank you. So Dave, tell us how you became a superhero.
Well, thank you for that introduction. That's great. So good evening, everybody. I'm Dave Boughton with MTC and ABAG staff. And I will be just giving a quick 10-minute presentation on Plan Bay Area 2050. Let me quickly share my screen here. As was mentioned, Plan Bay Area 2050 was just adopted by ABAG and MTC last month, October 21st. It was approved unanimously by both the ABAG Executive Board and the Commission after 4 years of work. This plan is significantly different from past iterations of our regional plans, really tackling new issue areas, reflecting critical topics like resilience to uncertainty and social equity to a much greater extent than prior planning cycles. So I'll take about 5 minutes to just give the very high level overview of this long range plan. The full plan is available on planbayarea.org. You can read it there. And also talk about some of the near-term implementation priorities. So just at a very high level, this has been a 4-year journey to create a brand new vision for the San Francisco Bay Area. It started out in 2018 with our Horizon Initiative, which was really focused on preparing for an uncertain future. And the work that was conducted during that phase was absolutely critical when COVID hit in 2020 and many of those uncertainties and new external forces hit the region. And we already had a playbook for how to respond to those sorts of challenges. Over the course of 2020, we refined the blueprint with first a draft and then a final iteration. And then, as I mentioned, the final plan was rolled out this fall. There are some significant new changes in this iteration of Plan Bay Area. It's the first regional plan that really pivots from trying to predict the future to instead acknowledging and planning for uncertainty. We lead with equity in all of the plan's 35 strategies, leverage new innovative public engagement techniques, both in person before the pandemic and virtual in the time since. And it lays out a set of strategies that show the challenging road ahead, but really what would it take to tackle our region's decade-long housing crisis? What would it take to achieve much higher greenhouse gas reduction targets set by the state? And an initial vision for some of the key environmental areas, like how we might protect the shoreline of the 9-county Bay Area region. Public engagement, absolutely critical to this process. I won't go through all of the different types of engagement conducted, but we engaged more than 23,000 people and got over 234,000 comments over the 4-year period. So lots of input. We held over 450 events over the course of the planning process and really focused those events to hear from communities that often haven't had their voices heard as much in our planning processes, equity priority communities, low-income communities, other underserved groups. The core of the plan is really this slide here. The plan is defined by 35 strategies. These are actions on the local, regional, or state levels in the topic areas of transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment. All 35 strategies are designed to advance the adopted vision to make the Bay Area more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all residents. Just the top lines for each of these elements of the plan. The transportation element includes strategies designed to maintain and optimize our existing system, make our existing transit network work better, build out a 10,000-mile-long bicycle and pedestrian network of protected lanes and trails, $100 billion plus next generation transit network, really designed to provide much greater connectivity in the Bay Area. In the housing space, the strategies focus on protecting and preserving affordable housing, but also spurring housing production at all income levels and creating more inclusive communities to address many of the equity challenges our region faces in this space. In the economy element, the strategies focus both on improving economic mobility by building those pathways to a middle class and trying to achieve a better jobs housing balance within the region. And certainly last but not least, the environment element includes strategies to reduce risk from hazards like sea level rise, earthquake, and wildfire, expand access to parks and open space, and importantly, reduce climate emissions. This is a sizable plan. It's $1.4 trillion in scope. As you can see on the slide here, it really breaks down into those 4 elements previously discussed. And while our transportation revenues are either existing or reasonably anticipated, we have significant funding gaps in the housing, economic development, and environmental spaces. And obviously, there's been a lot of good news from DC and Sacramento, not just in the last few months, but even in the last week on this front, that can help to start filling some of these gaps. But we also acknowledge that in addition to new federal and state monies, that in the future, the region will have to face challenging questions about regional and local revenue measures if we want to transform our region into a more equitable and sustainable place. If these strategies are implemented, we could really transform what life is like in the Bay Area, make it more affordable, reduce the share of a household's budget by 13% as a share of total income for housing and transportation, which would bring the Bay Area from one of the most expensive places in the country to much more in line with the national average. We could achieve even greater reductions for cost burdens for low-income households through deed-restricted affordable housing programs. The plan strategies would also improve access to transit and safe bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And this would allow us to shift a very, very sizable 20% of all workers out of their cars and into more sustainable modes of transportation. The plan would also provide more affordable housing in historically exclusionary jurisdictions, creating pathways to home ownership for lower income residents, meet the state's greenhouse gas target, protect 98% of all homes from sea level rise impacts through 2050, and improve jobs housing balance in counties and throughout the region, yielding shorter commutes for all workers. These are just a handful of the positive outcomes from the plan. There's much more information in the plan document, but as you can see, the strategies really demonstrate what it would take to improve the Bay Area and the lives of residents. To just zoom into Santa Clara County for a moment, I can't talk about Santa Clara for every one of the 35 strategies, but I did choose 4 here just to spotlight some of the Santa Clara specific storylines. You know, in the transportation element, strategy T11 includes robust investments in regional rail. For Santa Clara County, obviously this includes the completion of BART to Silicon Valley, but it also includes additional investments beyond what is happening on the Caltrain corridor today to support more more service, including high-speed rail service, station upgrades at Sheridan Station, and investments in the light rail network that would transform it, creating new connections to places like Cupertino and improved service in the North First Street corridor. Strategy H6 and the housing element would transform aging malls and office parks into neighborhoods. And Santa Clara County saw much of its growth in the mid to late 20th century. There are a number of aging malls and office parks that are opportunity sites for mixed use development. And so the plan includes transformation of declining shopping malls, locations like the Great Mall or Eastridge Center or Valco Mall that could be turned into a mix of residential and commercial in the future. In the economy element of the plan, it really enables greater commercial development opportunities along transit corridors. This will create the opportunity for jobs to locate near transit, which is one of the key challenges to driving transit ridership in the South Bay, is that many of the jobs are located not within a short walk of transit today, and we can work to improve that through strategies like EC4. And lastly, strategy EN9 to expand transportation demand management initiatives could provide significant benefits given the number of large employers in Santa Clara County working to put public funds and work with private sector companies to expand their programs as well for carpooling, van pooling, bike share, and more. So just to zoom in from the 30,000 foot level, 30-year long range plan to the next year, 2022, we have laid out in Plan Area 2050, 80 plus implementation actions for the next 5 years. And a significant subset of those are going to get started next year. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the major initiatives MTC and ABAG will be pursuing in the year ahead. It really all starts with housing. As you're probably aware, the Bay Area Housing Financing Authority was created several years back, and in recent months has been awarded a $20 million really kind of seed money or startup grant to deliver a suite of pilot projects. And in 2022, 5 of those pilot projects will be moving forward, from a homelessness prevention system to the Doorway affordable housing application platform, which allows lower income residents to apply, do one form and apply to many different affordable housing developments instead of having to go through the paperwork every single time in different cities across the region. And it streamlines that process, making their lives easier. There are several of these other pilots as well, but they're really designed to show how BAFA, the authority, might work in the future as the topic, the discussion continues over potential regional measure in that space. We're also working on a transit-oriented development policy update that will provide enhanced guidance for local jurisdictions as transit investments move forward to ensure that land use supports both existing investments and new projects in the pipeline. In the economy space, MTC and ABAG will be exploring potential funding sources for the Priority Production Area program. While maybe less relevant to Santa Clara County, as most of the priority production areas in the region are in the East and North Bay, for the handful of PPAs, as we call them, in the South Bay, this may create opportunities for planning grants or other infrastructure monies as we move forward. Furthermore, the new economy element in the plan will be woven into the advocacy platform for MTC and ABAG, given the significant needs we have in the economic recovery space. A lot going on in the transportation space as well. You may have heard about the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force. Implementation work continues on that front. We're also developing a major project advancement policy for transit mega projects really across the region to determine really the kind of priority order for those investments, since there are so many billion-dollar projects out there. We're also completing the fare coordination study, again, kind of connected to the Blue Ribbon work. So there's a lot going on in the transit space to position our transit operators for success coming out of the pandemic. We're also going to be kicking off the next generation freeway study next year, really focusing on deep community engagement about the future of our aging freeway network and how pricing can play a role, both to generate revenues to improve those corridors, but also to make our freeway corridors more equitable in the future. And in the environmental space, several initiatives here. The Sea Level Rise Funding and Investment Framework, which is a priority coming out of the plan and BCDC's Bay Adapt process, will be kicking off. This will provide resources for local jurisdictions and the region to understand the trade-offs between different funding sources for sea level rise adaptation, and help us refine the vision for the shoreline protections across the region. We're also working closely with the Air District to accelerate implementation of climate strategies, including leveraging new funding sources or new and expanded funding sources that may come our way in 2022. So those are just the highlights of some of the key work going on at MTC and ABAG to implement the long-range plan in the year ahead. But with this, I'm happy to take any questions. And again, I would direct you to our website, planbayarea.org, if you'd like to read the final plan for the region.
Thank you, Dave. And I believe it's a day off for you. So I want to make sure we thank you for joining us on your day off today. Questions from board members? I see no hands raised, so let's go to the public. And Roland.
Good evening, Dave. So first of all, I appreciated the comment that you said about potentially extending the light rail to Cupertino, but having said that, I don't think it's going to happen. Right now, Mayor Liccardo is opposed to any further extensions of the light rail. He calls it a failed system. He wants to rip it out and replace it with rubber tires. But I believe that the next mayor of San Jose may have a different view. With regards to Caltrain, the VTA is on a full-bore attack to convert every single Caltrain station south of San Jose to TOD. The Tamian station is already gone. we've just managed to save Gilroy, and as of last night, the San Jose Planning Commission approved essentially turning the Capitol Station to TOD. My last comment, Dave, I don't know if you can see the chat, but I tried to find the slides. There was a slide on the afternoon of the second day of the MTC workshop that showed the Link 21 that was predicting 130,000 round trips coming from the south through Gilroy every day, and an additional 80,000 also round trips heading south from Santa Clara County into the Monterey Bay area. And I was wondering if you'd like to comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, and would anyone else like to speak? Seeing no hands raised, I turn back to our panelists, our board directors, and see if there's any questions of Dave or any comments based on the presentation and just the ongoing discussion that all of our cities have been following with this plan. Okay. Yes, Stanley.
Thank you. Just a simple question, Dave. And the question is, how do we plan to pay for all of this?
Yeah, so this a couple things on this front. First of all, as I mentioned, many of these new monies that are coming from Sacramento and DC are starting to fill those financial gaps. So that is kind of an exciting time in our country right now, as infrastructure is at the top of the national policy discussion. As you know, there are opportunities now for the region to go to the ballot on things like housing and transportation, to fund these needs and put the question to the voters. So those are some of the opportunity areas. I would also note in the transportation space, the plan assumes expansions of user fees. So pricing our freeways, additional parking pricing, these can generate revenues for our needed infrastructure in the Bay Area. Obviously will be a challenging process, and a process where we're gonna have a lot of community engagement over the next 5 to 10 years, but those are the sorts of strategies that are necessary to fill those financial gaps.
Are we dealing with tax credits? Are we dealing with accelerated depreciation if one makes certain investments? Are we dealing with perhaps maybe trading in real estate that one currently has, and such as the redevelopment areas, and having significant tax reductions? Are any of those things being considered at this point in time?
Well, maybe I should take a step back for a second. I think it's important to remember that this is a long-range regional plan. It's not a funding document. It doesn't fund any specific projects in the region. It's a framework for the types of public policies and a list of potential investments. But ultimately, not only will there be federal and state programs to fund many of these things in the future, the region gets various funding sources and goes through funding cycles to dole out monies going forward. So, the plan is really about identifying what revenues do we have locked in, available, reasonably anticipated in the years ahead, and then what are those gaps, so we can then have the conversation over the next couple of years of what types of funding sources are most appropriate, which ones are most equitable, that sort of thing. So I know I may not have given you, the satisfactory level of detail for your question. It's a good one, but ultimately, as we move forward, what Plan Bay Area is basically saying is, if we want to tackle these challenges, this is the scale of the financial need, and then we can then have a discussion as a region about what type of revenue measures might be most appropriate, if any.
I like the fact that you guys are talking about reducing carbon footprints and being able to be more sustainable. And although you didn't mention this, the reduction of natural gas or greenhouse gases in all of this 2050 plan. So I probably won't be around by that time, and you will, so good luck.
Oh, Stanley, don't say that. Liang?
Hi. So thank you for the presentation. I'm glad to see that there will be transportation considered to Cupertino. I think transit to accessible area is really the key to provide affordable, naturally affordable housing. I'm curious with one number that you said that is expected to reduce housing price by 13%. I'm wondering how is that calculated, because we know housing price a lot of times is determined by market speculation and in earnings of people. As long as there are people who can afford to pay, the housing price just keep going up, rental price keep going up, and investors coming in and buy stock, housing stock up. So we can't control that. So how, what in your plan could really help reduce the reduce the possibility of housing stock become a commodity so that it really drives the price up? Housing bills in the past years haven't really helped that much. So.
Certainly. So let me break my response into two parts. So first of all, just to clarify the metric, it's not housing price, it's the housing cost burden, which is basically housing and transportation cost burden, which is basically if you take your household's budget, right, and it's a pie, how many percentage points of the pie are for housing, how many are for transportation? Currently, for most Bay Area households, I believe it's for the average Bay Area household is just under 60% are spent on those two things. And so what we're saying is that we'll be able to reduce that by 13 percentage points. So by normalizing it based on income level, we were able to kind of address the concern that you were just mentioning about incomes will indeed go up and so will housing prices, but can we make sure that housing prices are going up at a much slower rate than income growth, so we can bring down that share of a household's budget that's spent on housing. And the way we do that is really a couple things. On the lower income side of the spectrum, the plan envisions a massive increase in deed restricted affordable housing, preservation, production, leveraging federal and state revenues perhaps more efficiently than today, and then also generating new revenues or seeking new revenues from state and federal governments, but also potentially new regional and local revenue measures to fill that gap. And then at the same time, it is a matter of generating more housing supply overall. And the plan really takes a hard look at the places in the region. We call them growth geographies. These are places where additional zoning capacity may be needed in order to accommodate much more housing of all income levels. So with that supply-oriented strategy, but also the affordable housing funding, they really work together to help bring down the cost of housing as a share of income.
Okay, but that doesn't address the commoditization of housing, because when you increase the number of units, a lot of times that doesn't really bring down the price. And a lot of, even SB9, when you subdivide housing into 4 units, a lot of times each 4 new units are more expensive than the older one. So, because people are just able to afford. So how would the plan address that issue?
Well, I think I guess I make a couple points on that front. I mean, one of the things we've seen in the Bay Area in recent decades is our housing production keeps becoming less and less, and the share of it that's for anyone below kind of a high income status is it's very small for folk that is kind of deed restricted or even non-deed restricted affordable units. So what the plan really is trying to do is significantly increase production of all incomes, of units at all income levels, to try to reverse those trends, because it's that decline of production that has been a key contributor to pushing people out of the Bay Area. And then the only folks who are able to live in the Bay Area are the ones who are able to purchase those higher income units. That's kind of one of the key drivers of the housing crisis we face today. And so in order to reverse that, we really have to go back to the basics and take a look at all of these challenges, the policies that have been implemented over the years, and make sure that we have the funding levels that are necessary to realize the strategies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you, Dave, for joining us today, and thanks for all the work that you've been doing on our behalf.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And so just as we talked about Plan Bay Area, that it goes hand in hand, ABAG and MTC, I now turn to Margaret, who will, as our City Selection Committee appointee, will share the work that MTC has been doing on our behalf.
If I may, I just want to, when we receive the presentation from Dave, and we will also be putting Margaret's presentation online as well, so that everyone can access them when they would like.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, President Sayoc, and good evening, everyone. If I had known that Dave was going to be here to do the presentation, I could have asked him to do the MTC side too, but I'm going to do my best to do the transportation piece. It sounds like today there's been a lot of conversation about housing, which is great. I've always believed that housing and transportation go hand in hand. And so I'm pleased to give you an update on what MTC has been up to this past year. I was appointed by all of you at the beginning of the year, so coming up on my first year, and a lot of going on. You'll see actually a lot of repeat items from Dave's presentation, which is great. I'm happy to go over some of that again, reinforce some concepts. But I also thought that since I've been on City Association, I don't think I ever saw a MTC update. And so I thought it was important to just kind of lay down the basics of what MTC is, what it does. It actually does quite a bit. I think folks might be under the impression that since the merger, they've been, doing housing, but in fact, transportation is still their main focus. There is more coordination with the housing side and the ABAG. Obviously, the staff is combined now, but I wanted to go over some of the initiatives that MTC is working on. So next slide, please. So just in terms of the structure, it is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the San Francisco Bay Area that covers the 9 counties. There are 12 urbanized areas that are set by the federal government, and you'll see the 101 cities and towns, the population. There's 27 independent transit operators, and that's always been the challenge, is how do we coordinate with so many agencies? And then there are 4 different board presidents of the MPOs. Next slide, please. So there are many agencies under MTC. There is MTC itself. There's also BAFA, which Dave mentioned. This is the newly created Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. I was actually appointed by MTC to BAFA. BATA is the Bay Area Toll Authority, so we're responsible for the bridges in the Bay Area. And then SAFE is the service authority, so the safety, the public safety piece of the freeways and expressways. Next slide, please. We have partner agencies that we work very closely with. I'm not going to read everything because I have 24 slides and 20 minutes to do it. But there's definitely several agencies at the federal, at state, and local levels that MTC works with. Next slide, please. And then we have our partner agencies, BCDC, Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which I also serve on, and then ABAG, as you know, and with the recent combining, I guess you could say, of the 2 agencies in terms of their staffing. Next slide, please. There's 16 commissioners representing the Bay Area cities. The 3, I won't go through all of them, but there are 3 from the South Bay, myself from the City Association, County Supervisor Cindy Chavez from the county, and Mayor Sam Liccardo from San Jose. San Jose has its own seat. And then we also have representatives from ABAG, BCDC, and then again, HUD, Cal Studies are the state, and then USD, Department of Transportation. Our current chair is from Napa County, Supervisor Pedroza, and our vice chair is the San Francisco Mayor's appointee, Nick Josefowicz, who is a policy director at SPUR. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into this, but this is basically just about the combining of ABAG and MTC. I think, and Liz would be probably more knowledgeable about this. There is supposed to be a discussion about the governance structure with these two agencies in the new formation, and I believe that's still being undertaken at this time. Next slide, please. I talked about Plan Bay Area, so I won't go into that, but it's certainly we have our transportation strategies, big strategies that we need to be to engage in. Next slide. And again, we went through this too, the various strategies. Next slide. Regional Measure 3, you may have remembered a few years back. This was passed by ballot measure. This is toll collection. And these are the various major projects that the funds will go towards. At this time, it's actually in litigation, so it's on hold at this moment. Next slide, please. In terms of operations, MTC is in charge of information, freeway aid, express lanes. The ones outside of Santa Clara County, BTA actually runs the Santa Clara County express lanes, toll and fare collection, and then ways to encourage ride sharing, carpool, whatnot. Next slide, please. Fast Track is run by MTC. So this is the transponder that everyone has in the to be able to ride in the express lanes. We are actually there's another slide, so we'll go to that next slide. And then 511 traveler information. If you ever need any wayfinding, you can call 511. Could we go back to one slide? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. Next slide. Thanks. Oh, there we go. Clipper is also run by MTC. This is the blue pass that should get you, has your fare on it to be able to ride the various transit systems in the Bay Area. Clipper is going through a number of projects or pilot projects. One is something that's called Clipper Start. So they've launched a regional means-based transit fare pilot program. The goal of the pilot is to try to improve affordability and increase access. So it's a lower fare based on your income level. And this was launched last year with a 3-year pilot. We actually just got a presentation the other day about how it's going. COVID definitely has change things, or the data isn't as robust as we would have expected at this time, but the whole purpose is to try to increase ridership, make it easier and affordable. And so I would say equity is really a big focus for MTC as well. Next slide, please. And then this is also in terms of Clipper, just making it easier for folks to be able to pay for their fares with more payment options, being able to load it faster. We actually also have talked about just making it easier to open a Clipper account and then integrating it with our other services like parking and paratransit. Next slide, please. So BATA, the Bay Area Toll Authority, that's also under MTC, runs the 7 bridge system in charge of maintenance and also the tolls the toll collection system. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, Fast Track has been expanded, and there are actually plans to make it all electronic tolling. And then COVID hit, so that accelerated the whole process of all electronic. So at this time, we are able to do all electronic transactions. There again, the fast track is in terms of equity. We're trying to engage in efforts to make it easier for folks to open a fast track account. Right now, you have to have I think $25, I believe, in the account to open it, or we're going to reduce that to $5. Fines are always very challenging for lower income folks, so we're looking at ways to reduce that, looking at a payment plan. So just trying to make it easier for everyone to be able to use Fast Track. Next slide, please. And as mentioned, so MTC runs these express lanes. So other than the Santa Clara County express lanes that VTA runs. Next slide, please. And then we talked about BAFA. So this is the Housing Finance Authority. And as David mentioned in his presentation, the initiatives we're working on is this expanded regional housing portfolio, looking for ways to secure new funding. The 4 P's, complementing and fortifying, is preservation. I totally just forgot what the 3 P's are, but there's production, preservation, and protection. Thank you. Their efforts are focusing on assisting local governments and the local housing staff by being able to collaborate more and to provide best practice information. And then, as David mentioned, the launching of regional pilot programs. So there's several initiatives being undertaken. As mentioned, we received $20 million from the state as seed money to get some of these pilots off the ground. Next slide, please. Another initiative that the Commission engaged in as a response to COVID last year was the formation of the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force. It was composed of 32 members representing the state, MPC, transit agency operators, and then various advocacy and stakeholder groups. The initial purpose was that the federal government provided, just like they did to all of our cities, COVID relief funds. And so the task force was tasked to come up with some kind of allocation system for the phase 2. There are actually 3 phases to the COVID relief funds. So phase 2 was under their purview. But then it actually kind of expanded into this action plan that was formulated to really kind of strategize on how to come out of COVID and also integrate the seamless transit principles. I think it's fair to say, if you remember, some of you who've been with the Cities Association, I think it was last year or maybe it was 2 years ago, the Cities Association actually adopted the seamless transit principles that was put forth to us by the Seamless Transit Advocacy Group. And some of those principles are being integrated into this action plan, or the action plan are ways to implement some of those principles. So the work being done near term is fair coordination and integration, mapping and wayfinding, transit priority, meaning like bus lanes, transit lanes, bus lanes, express lanes. And then the future discussion, which is starting, is how to coordinate better with some kind of network management system, agency, organizations, all that TBA, but beginning to engage in those conversations of how all these 27 transit agencies can work together more as coordinated, as close to one agency as you can. Next slide, please. So then I wanted to talk a little bit about our county relative to, frankly, the COVID relief funding. So that's actually been a big part of the work we've done this year. The Bay Area received about $2.2 billion in COVID relief funds. So MTC is the agency that gets the funds, and then they are in charge of figuring out how to allocate those funds. So this is a little kind of, I'm going to try my best to explain it, but please bear with me because it's a little, yeah, I'm not the best at explaining this, but the federal government designates areas called urbanized areas, UZAs, and San Jose is one of them. So based on our population and transit service that's being delivered, the federal government will provide certain amount of funds. San Francisco and Oakland is also a large UZA. Some of the other cities, counties are in smaller UZAs, but all of that funding actually gets put together and given to MTC. So with COVID monies, the federal government uses those UZA formulas to provide the amount of funding, but MTC had engaged in coming up with other formulas to allocate that money. Because of COVID, the main challenge right away was the loss in revenue. So that was factored into how that funding was doled out. So I wanted to show our county demographics that we are the largest county in the Bay Area, 7th in the state. In terms of diversity, and when we talk about equity, I think this is very important that our communities of color is now over the majority. And then we have the other demographics. So if we go to the next slide, how that ties in. This was the relief, the COVID money that we received, the VTA received. And VTA is the main agency for Santa Clara County, of course. So the blue is the line that is the funding based on our UZA. And the orange was what we ended up getting through the MTC allocation. And we had a lot of discussion about this. The main point here was that we, the South Bay VTA, did not get the full funding that we could have received if we just went by the federal UZA formula. Next slide. And this has been an ongoing discussion where basically Santa Clara County, I think in many ways we're a donor county. So it just brings to question if we were receiving our full funding, how much more in terms of service hours per capita, for instance, VTA could be providing. And this is a comparison with some of our similar agencies in the country where VTA stands relative to the others. Next slide, please. And then I've always felt like if you go to the East Coast, it's actually 6-minute headways you see often. I think, if we could get to 10-minute headways, we'd be doing really well. And the amount is, the green is the current service, our core services at VTA, and how much more we would need in terms of funding to be able to get to 10-minute headways. And then the plus is a larger area. And I bring this up because this is kind of the push and pull that we're dealing with in terms of funding being limited. The Blue Ribbon Task Force, it was, and other initiatives, it was asked by some of you, where's the funding going to come from? Some of the COVID relief funds went to Blue Ribbon Task Force initiatives, or it's been allocated or earmarked for them. And the debate, the conversation that we have been having is that the right place to put the money? What are we, I guess, giving up in terms of service by doing that? one thing I would point out with the Blue Ribbon Task Force is that a lot of the initiatives that you saw are really about being able to go from one system to another, which is really important. But in Santa Clara County, I would just point out that about 80% of our trips start and end in Santa Clara County. So these are just some of the issues that we're debating on right now. The others, as I was mentioned, the revenue measures that are being talked about. So BAFA, the Housing Finance Authority, did some polling on a revenue measure. The polling didn't come out very favorably for next year, so they're probably looking at 24 at this point in terms of the Blue Ribbon Task Force initiatives. There's also talk about a potential revenue measure. My ask of all of you, and I hope that I can come back in the next year as we move forward with these conversations, is to get your input on some of these concepts and initiatives so that I can make informed decisions based on what us as a cities association and our cities in Santa Clara County would like to do. Next slide. I think the last slide is just some information if you'd like to learn more. Here's some websites links. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Margaret. I definitely learned a lot. I didn't realize how many different avenues of revenue was managed by MTC. Questions? Nisa.
Thank you, President Sayok, and thanks, Director Abikoga. That was a very informative presentation, and I learned a lot as well. I am fascinated by this UZA formula, and I'm curious who or what process made the determination that we would go with the MTC formula as opposed to the federal formula, where we ended up with a lot less ARPA funds. Like, how was that determination made?
So my understanding, and please forgive me that I'm still really trying to come get up to speed with all of this, and I've been trying to study up as much as I can. But so the federal government sets the UZAs, but there's also the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO, which MTC is. So every area has an MPO, and MTC is that MPO. So they've been in that regard been assigned the funding goes to MTC. So then and I've heard this has happened over time, but it's that pull of local control versus being a part of the region, right? So in terms of the COVID relief funds, it was MTC that that came up with the formulas on how much each agency should receive. And I wasn't around for the first round, but I think at that time revenue loss was the main concern and main factor. And so that was what was used or as part of the formula. This time around, in this last calculation, actually this last round, they used the same formula as the first round. And so for us in Santa Clara County, frankly, BTA actually didn't have a huge loss of revenue compared to the other agencies. So we didn't receive as much funding. And then is basically there's a deadline about when these funds needed to be allocated. And so there was an intent to maybe tweak that formula, but because of this deadline that came from the federal government to extend the funds by a certain time to be able to qualify for more funds, we had to rush and basically use the same formula. And I will say that this vote took place last week. The three of us from the South Bay voted against it. They did, and for me, my concern with VTA was that in light of the shooting tragedy, we have a lot of needs at VTA. And my thought was that, why not get some relief funds? We did. We ended up getting about $30 million more. But in the end, because of these formulas that haven't really been working favorably for us here, the three of us voted against it. So there might be some questions, why did you vote against getting money? And it was really that issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so I will take questions from our public. Roland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, with regards to the question about ARPA, it's twofold. So first of all, MTC became aware that some of the agencies received too much funding in the first round. Actually, there was a surplus of $750 million, which included $130 million in VTA, which are just sitting there that the VTA is planning to spend between now and I think 2028 to make up for the deficit. There was also the fact that Santa Clara County got this massive increase in tax revenues, which essentially came from eBay internet sales. However, in the last week, it has been ruled that these sales should not be going to San Jose because eBay happens to be incorporated there. These sales taxes should actually be distributed to wherever these goods, are going to end up being distributed, where, people click the click button to have something delivered to their houses. The impact on San Jose and VTA is going to be $35 million. Now, with regards to this regional sales tax, I think it's really grossly unfair to us because we are taxed more than anybody else. Now that we got both the BOD and the Katrina measures, we are taxed at 1.75% in Santa Clara County. Moving forward, I think we need to become smarter with the way we, invest our money in transportation, starting with the BOD system that pulls in less than $1 max for every dollar of Measure A and Measure B. And you contrast that with San Francisco, who is pulling on average between $4 and $7 for every single $1 of the sales taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Would anyone else like to speak on this matter? Okay, seeing no other hands raised, look to the board and see if there's any further comments, questions.
I could
yes, one more question. Councilmember Watanabe.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I have my video off because I'm having internet issues. I've been popping in and out in case anybody noticed, so I apologize for that. And as I came on, Margaret, you were talking, or you had a slide up regarding the BART and to San Jose and Santa Clara, and you were saying something about litigation, and needless to say, that perked my ears. So I was wondering if you could possibly go back and just go through that slide again. I was trying to see if it was slide 10, but I don't know exactly if your slides were in chronological order.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. It was slide 10, and it was actually in regards to the RM3 funds. So the RM3 measure that increased the bridge tolls. We passed it a couple of years ago. That's been in litigation. And so the funding is on hold right now, but some of those funds are meant to be allocated towards the BART project in the South Bay.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you for just going through that again. I appreciate it because that was definitely news.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you again, Margaret. And if I see no other hands raised, so I'll now move us to agenda item number 4, which is our fiscal year 2022 budget update.
You have it.
I'm sorry. We do have a question. Leah?
If there's time, thank you, Margaret, for so much information. It's too much to absorb. I don't think I understand everything, or even a few percent. So the ARPA funding, it sounds like South Bay did not get the amount of funding we think we should deserve. Is there any way to advocate for us, either now or in the future, that we transit infrastructure is really lacking, as you pointed out, and we don't even have 10-minute headway. So what could the Cities Association do, or the South Bay do, to get our fair share?
Thank you, Liang, for that question. And yes, this is, I'm still trying to absorb everything too. So I hope I can come back next year and do more updates to the association. But yeah, in regards to funding, this has, I guess, been an historical debate. You know, our delegation has kind of been on different sides of it over the years. I think though that this time, our current delegation, we're starting to coalesce behind this concept about, you know, the South Bay getting its fair share. There's other aspects to these formulas that are built in, such as like the ridership, transit ridership. And frankly, San Francisco currently has over 50% of the ridership of transit in the Bay Area. So, you know, they do get quite a bit of funding as a result, which I think they, you know, deserve. But when we talk about the future in terms of potential ridership and new ridership, and then for me, when we talk about equity, you know, I think that's where the South Bay of Santa Clara County really comes in, because as the largest county in the Bay Area, as a county that has a majority POC population, if we're really serious about equity, and we want to increase ridership, which I think we all do for, you know, climate change reasons, as well as just revenue, I think we deserve, the South Bay does deserve more recognition and you know, ways to receive more resources. So I brought this up today because to just start the conversation, and I believe that MTC, they understand and they acknowledge it. And so there are commitments to start discussing this more, I believe. And so as those conversations happen, my hope is I can bring it back to this body and get your input. But I wanted to bring it up just to, you know, for your awareness. And, you know, I think it's not the only reason, but it's a reason as to why we may not be getting enough transit service, or, you know, that we think we should have. So, and it's going to become more important as we grow, and, you know, we have to meet our housing needs, right? So I just wanted to kind of spark the conversation tonight. And then as we move forward, have more opportunities to discuss it further.
So are you saying that allocation is partly dependent on existing ridership? But since we have very long headway, of course, there is less people who are willing to ride.
Yes.
Then using that doesn't
right.
seem to make sense. It seems low ridership means we have potential growth, right?
Yes. And so I think that that's the conversation that within the commission that needs to happen if it hasn't happened. And, you know, I'm still learning about what's been discussed before, but San Francisco has made the case that they have 50% ridership, so they should get funding. But I think our biggest argument is that we're the largest county, the most diverse, and so we have the potential for the most new riders. And that, for that reason, we should be able to increase our transit service here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mock.
Thank you, Margaret, for your excellent presentation. I wanted to mention that there is a video on TV. It's called Smart Cities, And one of the items they talk about is transportation, because the cost of housing in our general vicinity is astronomical. So if we can have people transported effectively to their industries, wherever they happen to be, in an effective fashion, they can live like maybe in Stockton or something, and then they transport into Santa Clara. We don't have that capability currently, but I think that sometime in the future, as we develop our density, and we will, then we should be able to have the appropriate transportation. So the work that you're doing is very important. And again, I'd like to thank you for it.
Thank you, Stanley. Yes, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm a proponent of high-speed rail, and in part for that reason, that maybe with more transportation, transit, we can expand our reach in terms of where we build housing. There's debate, of course, on that, but I think how transportation is part of the solution to housing. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if we could now move to agenda item 4. I apologize, my smoke detector is beeping. So after this meeting, I am going to be changing my batteries. So Andy?
Here, I thought it was someone else's.
I was going to blame Margaret.
It's
I was too. That's pretty funny.
I've had my husband searching our house for it.
My husband came in with
It's
a letter.
Margaret. Oh my God.
I told him, don't change it now because I have to talk.
That's funny. Okay. If somebody wave at me if I need to turn my camera off if I'm going in and out. So today I am here to talk to you about a budget update. And as you may recall, that the approved budget from the Board of Directors included spending reserves below the threshold established in the bylaws. The approved budget maintained the same membership dues as adopted in fiscal year 20. And the approved budget increased legal services line item to complete the HR investigation and the organizational status change. It is currently estimated that the reserves and cash on hand will be exhausted before the end of the fiscal year. All other line items remain within budget. Sorry, my my device froze. There we go. So the general fund budget does not include the Planning Collaborative or the Santa Clara County Roundtable. The general fund budget abides by the principles set forth in the bylaws. The budget shortfall is because of unanticipated legal fees, which the board directed to be investigated. All other line items, again, are within budget. Staff sorry, it's the same part. So the suggested changes to the budget are to cancel the December event and the May 2022 event, and not to purchase any equipment. And then to look to reduce other line items. However, reducing expense of 90% of our expenses are staff and legal. And the other option would be to increase revenues by increasing dues, or to do a special assessment of all Cities Association members or just roundtable members. When approving the form, also, we could, when we approve the formation of a JPA, we could approve a budget to move forward at that point. And so the executive board had this discussion last Friday, and the executive board, their recommendation is a two-step approach. And part of this is has to do with a decision of the roundtable today. So I know that the roundtable approved a budget today and will be asking the Cities Association to invoice for that budget. I do not have the details of what they approved. They did have a resolution as a part of their packet, but I believe their packet was amended, or the resolution was amended. the recommendations from the executive board. If the roundtable decision at their November 11th, 2021 meeting leaves the remaining balance of expenditures to be reimbursed, direct the executive director and the president to assess the SCSC roundtable member cities. And then the second part is, should there be a continued balance of SCSC roundtable expenditures to be reimbursed after the assessment of the roundtable member cities, then assess the remaining cities association members in the first quarter of 2022. So that is the recommendation from the executive board.
Thank you, Andy. And then Nisa, as treasurer, would you like to add anything?
No, thank you, Andy.
Okay. And so I want to see if any directors have any questions. Okay. And seeing no questions, I'll turn to our public attendees. If either Liz or Roland would like to speak on this matter. Okay, seeing no hands raised, I'm going to close public testimony and bring it back to the board for discussion. There is a recommendation that we grappled with. I think as Andy said in her staff report, we tried to first look at reducing expenses. We tried to honor not increasing dues. And we felt this two-step approach was more equitable. Okay, so I'd look to the board for a motion.
So moved.
Okay, so Jones moved, and a second.
Second by Klein.
Okay, and are there any questions or comments to the recommendation? Yes, Tina?
Thank you, Mayor Sayak. I am a little bit puzzled here just because I have, I'm the alternate and I have not been following, not familiar with a lot of the discussion that has happened. So I'm a little confused about some of these things here, not having the history. So at this point, are we saying we move ahead with the budget adjustment for the amount that I am not clear how much is left over from the roundtable part? If somebody can help me understand that. And are we planning to increase the dues for each city? And who's going to be paying?
Andy, would you like to take that?
Sure, sure. So the amount that the executive board is looking at is $50,000, and currently we have invoiced the roundtable for just a little under $47,000 until September. That is through September, about September 2nd, and you recognize that we get bills, a month later. So when the bills come in, so we won't know the bills that we have until like through December 31st, we won't know until January what those bills might be. And so, but at 50,000, we could pay our bills through the end of the year. And so I think that what this motion does is that we believe that the roundtable members have passed a budget where I am unclear, but of what they passed and what their resolution was. I know they changed it, so it wasn't the resolution that was posted with their agenda. But we would first see if those cities pay those invoices. And then it's after that it directs, the motion would direct that we then go out and invoice again and follow those steps. And then in the first quarter, if they haven't paid, then we would go back to the other members. So the roundtable, if the roundtable is invoicing, the roundtable has a formula, and that was presented. The formula was presented to their cities, and that is based on population for the roundtable. And what we would invoice, we would just invoice every city the same amount, because it's it's like $3,000, depending if we're invoicing 8 cities or the 9 roundtable members, or if it's the cities. The executive board would just divide it by 15. And so I believe that it was about 3,300 if we if we invoiced all 15 cities, and then it was about 5,000 if we had to invoice the roundtable members.
But that's only based on the invoices so far. So we don't know what else is coming.
So I gave the roundtable had been given. They asked us to identify how much money. They asked us for a hardline figure first, and we said we could not give them a hard number because we don't know what the invoices are. So they asked us to estimate it, and so I took the bills that we had through for 9 months, and I divided it by 9 because it was 9 months, and then I added the other months to give them an estimate. And that's the best that we can do because we can only estimate what has come in so far.
Thank you, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
Rowena?
Yes, I am concerned for Montecito here. We only have 3,500 residents. And are we paying for the roundtable, even though we're not members of the roundtable?
You are right now, because the roundtable hasn't paid. We got the board gave direction for us to start billing the roundtable and the for staff time. And so beginning in January, per direction, we started billing them for our staff time. And so that is part of the invoices, our staff time for our attorneys. And your direction to me was anything that was spent on roundtable would be billed. And that was, and the decision, I believe that the part of the influencing of that decision was our audit that was done last year, and the audit said that the roundtable should be paying for staff time.
And what are the provisions for a city like Montecito to drop out of the cities association? You know, our revenues for Montecito is only 3 million a year, 3.5 million. And so any other additional cost is a big deal for us. Not necessarily for you big cities, but for a small city like Montecito, this is going to impact us, you know, significantly. So could you, we should have our legal talk to your legal counsel to see what we can do to minimize this, or perhaps see what we can do to drop out of Cal Cities, of Cities Association if necessary?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that, Andy. Definitely, I think it might be better to have that conversation offline. It is our hope, Councilmember Turner, that the roundtable cities will pay their share so that it will make the Cities Association whole, and your concerns will no longer. Basically, cities like ours that haven't that are not roundtable members will not have to incur those costs. But I think that's why we have a two-prong approach: is let's invoice the cities, the 9 entities that are part of the roundtable. Let's see what we get, and then let's reevaluate. But we'd be happy to have the conversation with your legal counsel and our legal counsel on what the provisions are moving forward.
Yeah, because I talked to my counsel last Tuesday night, and they did not give me authorization to actually vote on this. So I'm going to have to abstain.
Okay. And Liang?
Hello, hi. I do think it seems not fair for Montecito to be paying the same amount as every other city because they have much smaller population, but I don't know what's the way Cities Association usually split up cost. since I'm on the roundtable, I want to talk a little about the I think the feeling of roundtable members. The resolution will be splitting the expenses into 3 buckets. One bucket are the costs that the roundtable approved according to our bylaw, and then there is another bucket of costs incurred without getting approval first from the board. So then, and then there is another cost would be cost that's estimated the cost for the personnel issue. And then the roundtable said, I heard that, okay, after repeated request of asking for details of the expenses, and we didn't, the attorney of roundtable did not get answers. So from the point of view of roundtable board members, they are being asked to pay for certain expense they did not approve, they had no insight on, they were not given detail on. So then the resolution is we will invoice all the cities, and then each council will then decide how they will address the issue. I think for Cupertino, we will have to pay one way or another, but it's either through roundtable or through cities association. That will be the discussion of each council. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember Chow, for giving us that update. And I know we've had several discussions on this issue. I think the motion that that is on the table now is simply to invoice. I think there are a lot of decisions that have to be made should some invoices not be paid. But at this point, the motion is simply to send out the invoices to amend the budget to reflect the changes and to send the invoices out to the roundtable cities. And then after first quarter, making a decision based on what is in our coffers. So that's the motion. Any further questions before I ask Auden to clarify, to call the question? Okay, so Auden, if you can call the question.
All right. Fliger?
Yes.
Fliger, aye. Jones?
Aye.
Jones, aye. Leah?
Sorry, I'm going to abstain. There is so much history and context here. Saratoga is part of both Roundtable and Cities Association. That's not the issue. It is just my lack of not having the full context. So I will explain. I will abstain. Thank you.
All right. Will Leah abstain? Chow?
Yeah, just a clarification that we were told at the roundtable that invoicing is not a commitment for any city to pay. It's just we will send the invoice. Yeah.
That is correct.
All right. Chow, aye. Sayok?
Aye.
Sayok, aye. Bybee?
Aye.
Bybee, aye. Abakoga?
Aye.
Abakoga, aye. Turner?
No.
Turner, nay. Klein?
Aye.
Klein, aye. Watanabe?
Yes.
Watanabe, aye. Mock?
Abstain.
Mock, abstain. And Blankley?
Yes.
Blankley, aye. And sorry, Constantine?
Aye.
Constantine, aye. With 10 ayes, the motion carries.
Thank you. And we now move to item number 5, which is election of officers. At the last meeting, I mentioned that per our bylaws, I created a nominating committee consisting of myself, Vice Mayor Jones, and Councilmember Abikoga. And our recommendation for the officers for next year is to bring it down actually from 6 officers on the executive board to 5. This is a transition, we hope, to the JPA that would have 5 officers. And our nomination is for president, Vice Mayor Jones from San Jose, First Vice President, Councilmember Abikoga from Mountain View, Second Vice President and LAC Chair, that position is being combined, is Mayor Fliger of Los Altos, and Treasurer will be Mayor Constantine of Morgan Hill. So that is my nomination, and I open the floor to see if there are other nominations. Okay. And before we take any action, I want to see if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make any comments. So, okay, and so no comments, close public testimony, and I make my nomination into a motion. May I have a second? Councilmember Chow, Vice Mayor Chow, excuse me.
Actually, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, please.
So
well, actually, first, if I may, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, just if I could have a second and then we can open it up for comment.
I'll second.
Okay,
Klein.
Second by Mayor Klein, and then Vice Mayor Chow.
Okay, so I actually looked into the past history of cities who have served as executive board in cities association. I think in the past, Cupertino had a former council member Rod Sings, who have served on the executive board. But then I find out that certain cities have never served on executive board. And I find there is an inequity in what cities are more actively involved or not. For example, the 6 cities hardly ever, the 60 cities almost never served on executive board is Santa Clara, never. Campbell, I think once. Gilroy, never. Los Altos Hills, never. Milpitas, never. Monte Sereno, never. And then the executive board, I find, tend to be rotating among the same members. So I asked my city attorney that I hope this kind of inequity could be addressed when we form a JPA, so that there is more transparency and more equity in terms of decision-making process in the JPA. Because, for example, I didn't know how we can put an item on the agenda. And I emailed Mariko, she didn't know either. So it seems this kind of process issue should be made more transparent on how, who should make decision and what's the process, so that all members could be equally involved in the future cities association JPA. So yeah, thank you.
So any further comments? And before I actually take any further comments, I do want to make sure, I know I took comments before I made the motion, and so I want to go back to the public to see, now that we have a motion and a second, I'm sorry, if there are any comments. Okay, so seeing none, I go back to our panelists and Mayor Constantine.
Thank you, Chair. And since we do have a motion in a second, perhaps I can make this in the form of a friendly amendment that we reopen the nominations if there's anyone from the cities that were mentioned that may want to serve on the executive board.
Yes, thank you. And I am willing to entertain that. And do I have a second on that friendly amendment?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Thank you. And so Mayor, I'm sorry, everyone, it's late. Councilmember Abikoga.
Thank you, President Sayoc, and thank you for the comments. I totally agree that it's rotating and making sure all the cities are represented is very important. And for past practice, there's a kind of a line of succession, but there's used to be the I guess the LAC spot that most folks would start with, and and that's how we brought in new members onto the executive board. Unfortunately, this year, because we're going down to one less executive board member, we don't have that slot, but there has been an attempt to try to bring in folks, and we actually just used to, and I think until this year, just open it up to see who would be interested in serving in that role and then working their way up to the presidency. We just don't have that slot this year, so that's why it's ended up this way. But yeah, certainly, you know, if there's interest, I hope that I think we can accommodate that in the future, and I hope that we will. Thanks.
Okay, Councilmember Chow.
Just one more comment. So I found that nominating committee usually is 3 members of the executive committee. So maybe in the future, I don't know how the nominating committee works, how they reach out to potential people, and maybe that process could be more transparent too, or maybe it could be starting the beginning of the year already. There could be an open invitation to everyone to consider it, that maybe some people could pay more attention. Oh, is that something I might want to do? And they can start learning what's involved. Then by the time when we need to nominate members, some people might have some idea, and maybe they can decide if they want to step up. But I thank you for all the executive board members. This is really a thankless job, and it's a lot of work put into that. And so thank all of you for serving us and for consecutive years. And it's not easy. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for those comments, because I think we have an opportunity when we go into our next, not today, but in our next discussion of what the next iteration of Cities Association will look like through the JPA. These are all great comments that that we can fold into what the next organization looks like. Because as you said, this is an organization of 15 cities, and we want to make sure it's representative of everyone's voice. So thank you for bringing these up. Councilmember Turner?
Yes, I would like to also make a recommendation here. If you could have a representative from small cities and medium-sized city and larger cities, it is very frustrating for smaller cities to come to a meeting like this knowing that we don't have a voice and we will always lose in the end. So I think, you know, changing the makeup of the executive board will definitely help. So we don't have this feeling of hopelessness.
Good point.
Good point. Councilmember Watanabe?
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to express my thanks to Councilmember Chow for her comments. Yeah, I guess I'm the new representative for Santa Clara, the city of Santa Clara. I've served as the alternate in the past, and Debbie Davis was the previous representative. And I know Debbie had a good voice, and is always very expressive of her opinions. And but like for me right now, as the new person representing Santa Clara, I feel like I have a learning curve, and probably a lot of us probably feel that way too. But by serving, for as long as we may be here, it does give us that opportunity to learn, and then be able to feel, qualified, to serve like on the executive board, and take that higher, go to that higher level. But I appreciate what Montessorino just stated, Rowena just stated, about having equity amongst, the larger middle city, mid-sized city and smaller cities, to be able to voice their concerns or about regional issues. And so as we move forward with the JPA, I hope that we will be able to definitely take that all into consideration. So thank you for raising these points tonight.
And Councilmember Turner, you have your hand raised. Is that another? Do you have another comment or? Okay, and we do have and yes, let's see. Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor that Mayor Constantine brought up. Would anyone from the cities that have not been represented on executive board like to be considered for nomination? Okay, so seeing none, let's go back to the original motion of the slate that was provided last meeting and that I mentioned again at this meeting. Any comments to that before I ask Auden to call the motion? Okay, so Auden, do you mind?
All right, Constantine.
Aye.
Constantine, I. Watanabe.
Yes.
Watanabe, I. Klein.
Aye.
Klein, I. Flagger.
Yes.
Flagger, I. Chow.
Aye.
Chow, I. Turner.
Yes.
Turner, I. Mock.
Yes.
Mock, I. Jones.
Aye.
Jones, I. Blankley.
Yes.
Blankley, I. Bybee.
Aye.
Bybee, I. Sayok.
Yes.
Sayok, I. Wulia.
Aye.
Wulia, I. Abakoga.
Aye.
Abakoga, I. And with 13 ayes, the motion carries.
Thank you. And so congratulations, President Jones. Would you like to finish off the meeting or would you like to take a break and do it for the next one?
I'm going to let you continue on this meeting, but if with your discretion, can I actually just say a few words?
Absolutely. It's your meeting now.
This is really directed to the small cities. I'm going to do a road show and I'm going to reach out to each and every one of you. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your aspirations, your goals, and what we want to accomplish. And for those of you who have worked with me, you know that I listen, I take it all in and we try to work together and be collaborative in terms of moving, the Cities Association forward as well as each individual city. So expect to get a call or email from me to set up that meeting. And I'm looking forward to talking in depth with each and every one of you.
Very well said. I think it'll be exciting with the new year to have a new organization. And I look forward to having you lead the inaugural year. Mayor Constantine.
Thank you, Chair. And that smile you have has gotten a lot bigger after that vote. I have a question for the chair-elect. I was wondering what he considered a small city.
Well, from my perspective,
everybody else but you.
Everybody does not San Jose. But I'm particularly focused in on cities like Montecito and Campbell and Saratoga. Well, there's quite a few cities, but the smallest cities, I definitely want to have in-depth conversations with, because I understand their concerns. I'm surrounded. My district, is surrounded by a lot of those cities. So I've had numerous opportunities to work with them in the past. We address a lot of the same issues and concerns. So I feel like I have a really strong understanding of some of the concerns, needs, wants, and desires of the smaller cities.
Thank you, Chair-elect.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so we now move to item number 6, which is the Santa Clara County City Managers Association update from Town Manager Pravetti. And before I give her the floor, I just wanted to thank her in front of everyone for all the tremendous work she's done to assist Cities Association this year as an ex officio member. So thank you, Laurel.
Thank you very much. It's been my honor to serve with all of you, and congratulations to the new officers. Really look forward to the future of the Cities Association. So thank you. The city managers did meet yesterday, and we heard presentations from the Santa Clara County Leadership Academy. One presentation was about economic recovery and some very innovative strategies to revitalize our cities in the aftermath of the pandemic. And the second was around strategies for the unhoused. So we continue to coordinate and collaborate on COVID-19 implementation. Clearly, the vaccine mandates are the current topic, so we await additional guidance from Cal OSHA. Thank you very much. And again, an honor to serve with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Jordan, Executive Director update.
We just finally received a contract proposal from ABAG regarding the REAP funds for continuing our planning collaborative work around the housing element. And so Gary will be reviewing that and looking at it, and we will take it to the executive board and the board. So we're not sure if we'll need to have another meeting in order to get that contract signed, but we'll have an update and I will communicate that with you probably via email. And then also we received a communication today, and I will forward that to you as well, from Supervisor Simidian regarding VTA. And so I've already shared that email with the transportation chair with Margaret Abacoga tonight. So you will look for those pieces of information soon. And that's it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to switch our order, and I'm going to go to public comment. And I believe Councilmember Gibbons, you mentioned that you'd like to make some announcements, and so I'd like to give you the floor. I'm sorry, Mayor Gibbons.
Believe me, you're forgiven. So thank you. Quickly, there are excess opera funds have been identified not only for our cities, but for the county. Supervisor Ellenberg has put forward a recommendation that $10 million of the county opera allocation be set aside for small businesses. She would like support for that proposal. So if not tonight, in the morning, I will send out the information and ask you to review that and consider sending a letter to Supervisor Ellenberg in support of her request for $10 million of support for small businesses in our cities. Second, I attended a legislative summary put on by Cal Cities, a joint summary put on by Cal Cities and ILG. Very, very good information and very good presentation. So I will just distribute that link. And third, the Cities Association, to my knowledge, hasn't had much discussion about redistricting. I will forward to you the information as current as I have been able to obtain about redistricting, significant redistricting discussions going on about the county, the Santa Clara County redistricting, but also the state level for Assembly and Senate, as well as congressional. And it would be useful, I hope, for all of you to have access to that information and contribute as you wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Roland.
Thank you. I guess I can still call you Madam Chair, or should I call Chappie Mr. Chair? The question is, as on an audience report, is whether the letter that the association received from Supervisor Simidian with VTA could be shared with the public without a PRA. So maybe if somebody would care to forward it to me via email, or if you could post it on your website somewhere, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I now close public comment, and Steve.
Thank you. Just a very small comment. The county has an ambassador program. Many of you get the announcements about the program when there's going to be information to share with your constituents when there's going to be a meeting on Saturday morning to get updates from public health and the County Office of Education. You all got an announcement that there was going to be such a meeting this coming Saturday. And I don't know if this is good news or not, but that meeting has been postponed. An announcement should go out tomorrow. So one less thing to be concerned about Saturday morning. I think it'll be held later. It'll have to do with children and vaccines, as well as the county's encouragement for all eligible adults, which is all adults, to get the booster shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And so now I open it up for any joys and challenges that board members would like to share. Okay. Seeing, yes, Mayor Fleiger.
Thank you, and I'll be quick. I really just want to thank you, President Sayak, for a great year leading the Cities Association. I know how much time you dedicated to this work and your commitment, and so I want to publicly recognize it and sincerely thank you. Congratulations to Vice Mayor Jones. I look forward to your leadership and working with you on the executive board next year. And my joy today, Los Altos and Los Altos Hills did the first ever that we know of joint Veterans Day celebration in downtown Los Altos, and it was well attended. And so we were very happy with the first one, and so hopefully it's something that the cities continue. Thank you.
Great. And Councilmember Chow, Vice Mayor Chow.
Hi. Wow, how do you remember all the positions? That's tough. So I think I had some personal challenges this week that I'd like to share. And I know that some of us, like Mariko, also had some challenges recently. So over the weekend, I was something that out of parents members only Google group in our local school district was taken out of context and posted on social media. And so some people thought that I thought Chinese Exclusion Act is not racist, and then started attacking me, and then there are certain, I think, politically motivated people that not only it has been promoted to international newspaper, Mercury News reported. So I'm instantly famous now. And I just want to explain that it was a long discussion. The discussion was on how to teach history and ethnic studies in K-12 education. And then I said, okay, in the context of trying to understand critical race theory, which is looking at examining events through a racial lens. And I think that's an important academic area for university, but for K-12 education, it might miss many aspects of the historical event. So I used Chinese Exclusion Act as an example that if you only look through racial lens, it's racism, but it's not merely racism, because it was elected to solve a labor issue that those domestic workers were facing competition from Chinese laborers. And then so to solve that problem, to protect our domestic workers, which I thought it was for good reason, right? It's a problem we should solve. But the policy enacted is racist. That in order to protect the workers, they enacted a racist policy to exclude all Chinese, not all Chinese, just all Chinese laborers out of the country. So that act, of course, is racist. My comment was simply saying that it's not merely racist, and there are other considerations, and especially Chinese Americans have been singled out to be discriminated even by federal government today. Many Chinese scholars and engineers are still being accused, even arrested with very little evidence, even when they are they were exonerated later, their reputation, their livelihood are ruined. And people who work with the State Department deployed to foreign as diplomats to other countries, they pass all the clearances, but still they are not being treated as other fellow Americans. And the Chinese and some countries, they are treated differently. They can never be deployed to China just because they have Chinese descent. But then other diplomats with other descent, ethnic background were not treated the same way. So that was the point I was trying to make. It was not merely racism, but it was taken out of context and then blow out of proportion. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing. And I think it's valuable for all of us to have space to share our concerns and our comments and so I hope you feel that you had a safe space to share that with us. So
yeah.
Okay, and Councilmember Mock.
I hope you guys can hear me. But being a Chinese American myself, I think that this nation has been built on the backs of workers who are all immigrants to this country. And those in power at the time, whatever time it happens to be, it appears that they have almost always taken advantage of the American Indians, the Native American Indians, of the Black slaves that were imported to this country. Filipinos actually were also involved in that, as well as maybe 20 different other ethnic minorities, which are Asian. And in spite of all of it, we've come out of this as a great nation. We've been able to fight we've been able to fight wars. We've been able to demonstrate economic viability, and we've been able to assimilate into the society. So I think that if I can just take a step back and be just like everybody else, which I wish to be, then I think that it would be wonderful. Now, as we go forward, I know that my kids may not feel that way, but they are special as well, because of course they are they are born in this country, but they're not of the predominant race. So what we're doing here today is to help our kids, and whether it be to stem the flow, not the flow, but stem the racism, to mitigate the circumstances of the racism. It could be a lot of things that we could be doing to be carbon neutral. It's really important for us to be examples for those people that are following us, whether they be Black, white, Asian, or whatever. We just have to be the best at what we can be. Thank you. And thank you, Vice Mayor Chow, for bringing that up. It's been on my mind. It's really difficult to get off my mind, because as I step out into the street, or if I step into this meeting, I know I'm different, but please don't see me as different. I'm just exactly like you. From a different country. My parents were from a different country. We're almost all from a different country, and we've all come in here. And by the way, the proverbial $50 or $25 that we all started out with, some of us started out with nothing. We've all made a go of it, and look at where we are today. I've had a wonderful life. I can't complain about this.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Councilmember.
If I can add something, so today is Veterans Day. So we visited a retirement center, and they are having a veterans appreciation, and we handed out proclamations to each individual members separately. And standing in that room of veterans, even though I'm from Taiwan, I've been here for 30 years, longer than the time I spent in my country, my home country. And my parents were veterans. I was born in the Army base. They met in the Army. So standing in there, yeah, it's all not many are of Asian descent, but looking at a room full of veterans, of Americans, all I felt was I felt like I was home. All these people who sacrificed their lives and to protect the country. I was thinking I didn't feel like I was a foreigner. I feel like they protected my country, the United States, and I feel like I was at home with them because that they are like my parents who were veterans. So yeah, I think that's all we feel. But then I do realize when other people see me or others who look like Chinese, their first assumption is you must be an immigrant. Even my kids, they are born here. Even my grandkids, who I don't have them yet, likely if they look like Chinese, people will assume they are foreigners. They are forever foreigners, and it's sometimes hurtful to be that. But it's hard to, yeah. But I think that's specifically unique to people who look like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese. They all face a similar kind of different kind of discrimination. It's not just a race-based. It's something related to this foreign country, China, which is far away from us. But yeah, there's a competition between US and China. We know that there is a big suspicion. We are always being suspected as potential spies, and that it really hurts. Thank you.
So I think both of you for sharing that. It's a challenge that I think we as Cities Association will continuously, continuously fight for. And I know that was something that was a high priority this year. And I believe it'll probably continue to be a high priority next year. But I think the joy is that all of us are determined to make a better community for each other and to see each other as wonderful individuals as all of you are. And so on that note, I'd like to adjourn this meeting, wish everyone a happy Veterans Day, and just say I appreciate all of you for all of what you bring to your community. So have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Mariko.
Good night.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Stay safe.